Mondays with Mitch here. We've been breaking down The Last Dance. Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, who lived it all, man. Covering the NBA for a long time, and I'm sure last night watching some of that brought back some interesting memories. The bad boy Pistons, they kind of get lost in the sauce there, Mitch, when we talk about teams and the NBA's growth, because as John Sally said last night, the NBA didn't want the bad boy Pistons in the way of anybody.
But you know what? The Pistons didn't want to be. They wanted to be outsiders. They wanted to be the renegades. They wanted to be the guys who weren't part of the in crowd. So when they complain about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Even back then, they wanted to differentiate themselves from the Celtics and Lakers and Bulls. And here's the big problem. I mean, they're very, that's a team that went to 3 straight finals. You could argue that in '88 they should have won. That's the finals where, they still complain about the call against Lambeer, where Kareem makes the big, free throws at the end of whether it was Game 7 after Isaiah's unbelievable performance in Game 6. I might have the games confused now, but anyway, it's a long time. But they later, they swept the Lakers the next year. Then they beat Portland, and that's a series in the Portland series in '90 where they beat the Bulls again for the 3rd straight time to get to the finals. And after the Pippen migraine game, Mike, and then when they lose Game 2 in Auburn Hills, so the series is tied at 1-1. This is Clyde Drexler and Terry Porter and that very good Portland team, and Portland goes back to Portland and they lose all 3 games. The Pistons win all 3 games on the road, which hasn't been done. I don't know if it's been done, now we're back to the old format, but I don't even know how many times it was done back then. So they were an outstanding team. Their big problem, and if you line them up historically, is, you've got the Celtics and Magic and the Lakers in the 90s, and both those teams have 3 of the top 50 players in the history of the league as voted on by this panel in 1996. They had the greatest 50 players of all time. You had Bird, Parrish, McHale for Boston. You had Magic, Kareem, and Worthy for the Lakers, okay? And the Pistons only had Isaiah. They didn't have anybody else. Now they had other really good players. They had Joe Dumars and they had Bill Laimbeer, and they were, they developed this great defensive mentality and game plan against Jordan. And then, of course, you had Jordan come on the other side of them winning, and it's now Jordan who's considered the GOAT with Pippen, who's also on the top 50 team. So they don't have the star power. And we're talking about not just stars. We're talking about, Bird and Magic are Mount Rushmore guys with Kareem. And, Michael Jordan, obviously. So that's why they kind of fade. They also obviously had a great coach at people in Philadelphia area, know quite well, Chuck Daly, who's outstanding. And I covered a lot of those Pistons Bulls playoff games, and I'm telling you, they were. You didn't look at the point total tally. You looked at the body bag tally, because that was some stuff that you don't see in today's NBA. The physicality of the Pistons, and until the Bulls learned how to deal with that and didn't back down and didn't complain. You heard Michael Jordan say last night how they finally stopped whining and complaining. And when Pippen got sent down in the 90 series, or was it 91, where the sweep happened and, the Pistons walked off the court, but he got knocked down early. And when John Sally said he didn't even ask for a Band-Aid, we knew it was over, because the Bulls had grown up. They needed to have 3 straight years of playoff failures, losing in 5, losing in 6, and losing in 7, and then coming back and sweeping them. Those were the years where you talked about every team needs to win it. You need to go through a type of a playoff, as Pat Riley called it, the painful playoff progression. And that's what the Bulls did. So I had a lot of fun watching that last night, the Pistons Bull. And I'm telling you, they knocked Michael Jordan down like he was a pinball, and they were really tough and physical. And I'll tell you what, like Michael Jordan said, the hate still exists today.
Well, I was going to say, Mitch, you just talked about how the Bulls, they had to go through the Pistons. The Pistons had to go through the Celtics, that progression. Right. I feel like that's gone. Like these manufactured teams, they don't have like where you get you get knocked out and then you come back again. We don't see that.
And here's the difference. The big stars of those teams, whether it was Isaiah, whether it was with the Pistons, whether it was Michael Jordan, they didn't throw up their hands like Kevin Durant did when they got, they blew that big series against Golden State in 16 and said, you know what, I'm going to go play for the Warriors now. Like Michael Jordan didn't say, you know what, maybe I should go join the Knicks, or I should go join the Lakers, or I should go join the Pistons, even though he was on a short contract. And Isaiah certainly didn't say, I want to go join the Celtics, because The mentality back then was every guy had his kingdom, his team, and the idea was to beat the other guy. And hopefully between trades and some, limited free agency, but trades, you had the GM with the wherewithal to do that. And Michael had that in Jerry Krause. As much as we talked about Jerry Krause getting killed in the first couple of in the first two parts, Jerry Krause was a mastermind in terms of getting Michael Jordan the right people, the famous supporting cast. They used to call them the Jordanaires of the supporting cast, whether it was the first three-peat team with guys like, Pippen and Horace Grant, whether it was later with Dennis Rodman and guys like Kukoc. So Jerry Krause did a great job for Michael Jordan. Some of these players like LeBron had to leave Cleveland because he didn't have a GM who could get the players there. That's a big change too. And for LeBron, the thing was he kept in. He said the reason he went to Miami and left was the big thing was how do I get past Boston? He could never get past Boston when he was in Cleveland or limited times, whatever. Once he got to a finals, and so he had to move. Michael Jordan and those guys never thought about leaving those teams.
Well,
that's the difference.
And the other, so then the other guy who was all over the place, he won a championship Detroit, won a championship San Antonio, and the trade is, people don't realize that they got Rodman for Will Perdue. I mean,
he didn't win it. He didn't win a title in San Antonio. That's he got out of there before they got him out of there because he was a total mess. I mean, I've known Dennis Rodman a long time. You got to remember he's from the Dallas area, South Oak Cliff. And he talked about that incredibly horrific background that he had, and I don't know if horrific's the right word, but obviously a deal where he's out on the streets by himself. I guess his mother threw him out of the house. What did he say last night? I was living in people's backyards for a couple of years. And Rodman, he was just a guy who, Michael Jordan's right. I mean, when you talk to Rodman, you really got a wealth of knowledge. This guy was incredibly, when it came to basketball analysis and what people were doing on the court and people's roles and strategy and X's and O's, he was a mastermind. Off the court, he was a head case. And you saw it last night with that whole thing about the Vegas, asking out, going on vacation to hang out with Carmen Electra in Vegas. And I'm telling you, back then, this is 98 or whatever, I'm sitting there watching it last night, Mike, and I go, it was a deal, but it really wasn't a huge deal because there's no social media back then. So could you imagine if Dennis Rodman did that today? TMZ would be camped out, they'd be breaking all kinds of stories in Las Vegas. First of all, it's still amazing that he asked for a vacation, like the great Michael Jordan line about if anybody should get a vacation on the team, it's me. And so the fact that they let him go because they needed to, because Phil had to give him you had to give him a lot of slack because Dennis Rodman just had a lot of issues off the court. On the court, for the most part, he acted out and stuff, but for the most part, big spots. He got rebounds. He played hellacious defense. Here's a guy who, Larry Bird used to carve up everybody when he first came in the league in terms of, who could defend Larry Bird. Here comes Dennis Rodman initially with Detroit, and you could see the beginnings of, wow, this guy is an unbelievable defender because he really made Bird work maybe better than anybody else. And then once he gets to the Bulls, after the San Antonio thing doesn't work out, and the San Antonio thing was a mess, Mike. He used to take off, when he get pulled out of a game, this is before Popovich, before Duncan, he'd get pulled out of a game, he'd walk to the end of the bench playoff game and take off his sneakers and just hang out. Right. It's just like, what's Dennis doing? It didn't look like a great team guy. And I'll tell you, I remember this specifically when the whole, the word came down that he was going to the Bulls in that trade you talked about. We're all sitting, and I'm talking about we being basketball writers back in the day. We're all saying, how is this going to work? He used to knock the crap out of Scottie Pippen, which they showed last night. Yep. Right? He used to, he was part of the bad boys. It's like, how does this guy actually go to the Chicago Bulls, and how are they going to accept him? And that's where you saw, Michael Jordan knew that they didn't have a Horace Grant anymore. They needed to get a rebounder. They needed to get, as Steve Kerr said, a guy who could give us an advantage on the front line because he was such a dominant player defensively and rebounding-wise. And so it's something that who knew how it was going to work with Phil, with Michael and Scotty. and it worked to the tune of 3 more championships.
Yeah, Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, and I thought the dynamic that they showed of how fragile Rodman could be, that when Pippen was out, that Jordan and him were like, boys, and then when Pippen came back, that Rodman felt like he was the outsider again.
That's what it was. And, I mean, I'm sure there were days there with Dennis Rodman where the Bulls probably were thinking, what the hell do we do bringing this guy in? But, as long as you had Michael Jordan there, and the thing I remember, too, thinking about it, trying to think about how was this thing ever going to work, Michael Jordan had done so much winning up to that point, with the three-peat, and then he came back, and then they get Rodman in there. You always felt like, well, Jordan now has established himself as the greatest player in the game. He and Pippen are the best 1-2 combination, right? They've surpassed Boston. Forget about Boston. Forget about Detroit. They've handled it. Nobody in the West is going to take this team apart. If any team can deal with Dennis Rodman, it would be Michael Jordan, because he was playing at such a high level, and he was winning basically everything. Don't forget, how about that series against Detroit? It's the 89 series where they had a 2-1 lead, and they lost 3 straight playoff games. Michael Jordan actually lost 3 straight playoff games. That's the last time he lost 3 straight playoff games. He only lost, I looked it up last night, during that run after that, when they start winning, clicking off titles, he only lost back-to-back playoff games like 4 or 5 times in all the series they played, which is, numerous. So anyway, you're getting back. I mean, Rodman was just a handful. And look, you got to give him a lot of what he did on the floor for them, but off the court, the guy was just like, oh man, this is an accident waiting to happen.
I want to leave you with this, because it was in this episode and this series against Detroit where Jordan finally, evolved a little bit, where he trusted some other guys, including like a John Paxson, and that really was what finally put them over the edge.
Well, that was a big concern, because, Michael had been a guy, you saw it when they made the move to Phil Jackson and Phil brings in the triangle. Michael's like, why the heck do I want to leave Doug Collins, who gets me the ball all the time? And you know what? I don't want to pass the ball to Bill Cartwright. No, Michael Jordan's not into equal opportunity here. He's not into equal opportunity offense. He's the guy. You remember, he led the league in scoring like 7 straight years, which I don't think had been done since like Will Chamberlain. And for a wing player, there are a lot of people who are like, what, Phil's playing a triangle. Where they're going to take the ball out of his hands. But that's where he had to build. He had to get trust in guys like Paxson. Bobby Hansen made big shots for them in playoff games, also with Jordan not taking the shot. And then obviously they showed the 91, the clinching game, when they, after they lost game 1, then they go out and they win 4 straight with the big game at the Forum in Los Angeles, the game they clinch the title, where John Paxson goes crazy in the 4th quarter. Up to that point, there was always that doubt whether Michael Jordan wanted to defer to somebody else or give it to his teammate a shot, and then he did that in the future, you saw with Steve Kerr notably. And, that adds to his legacy, right?
It absolutely does. So that takes us up to next week, where we get 2 more episodes. We're looking forward to that. I'm wondering how they're going to address the baseball stuff. I mean, what's going to come out of that whole story, I guess, is really the intrigue when we get to that point, because I guess we're getting there.
What they're going to take out of it is he couldn't hit the curveball.
All right, Mitch Lawrence at the Mondays with Mitch here that we've been looking back at these. These have been a lot of fun, man. This has been great, and great information from Mitch Lawrence, who covered it all, SiriusXM, NBA Radio, and we'll try to catch up with you next week, man.
Thanks, Mike. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, man, that's the good stuff from him, as he covered that era and still covering the NBA. SiriusXM NBA Radio. Forbes writes a lot of NBA columns, and, of course, you hear him here on the Sports Bash. But I thought it was an excellent episode last night.